Snow has covered this part of Wisconsin, and nor'easters are dumping snow all over my family in the Northeast. I am returned to Christmas when snow is supposed to cover the ground. My mother, on the other hand, although depressed that the baseball season is over, these midwinter nor'easters remind her that the pitchers and catchers are going to have to report for spring training fairly soon. I find myself midway between Christmas and spring training, two liturgical seasons in my household, and I know that there are people here that share the same. Whether it is the debate over the new name for Miller Field, America Family Park, I'll get used to what it's supposed to be fairly soon, or the Badgers playing, or whatever it is, our own spring sports, midway between Christmas and there, and I find myself in the middle of Micah. Micah, the 5th chapter, the 2nd verse. This is very familiar at Christmas time, but I found myself reading it again. Hear it with me. Now you are walled around with a wall. Siege is laid against us. With a rod they strike the ruler of Israel upon the cheek. This is about the walled cities, much like the walled city of Jerusalem. But you, O Bethlehem of Ephratah, who are one of the little clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to rule in Israel, whose origin is from old, from ancient of days. Therefore, he shall give them up until the time when she who is in labor has brought forth. Then the rest of his kindred shall return to the people of Israel. Micah, you, O Bethlehem. The story is going to happen so off-center from where we thought it should be that the scriptures invite us to remember what would be considered the minor narratives of what Micah is often called a minor prophet. I think Micah should not be considered a minor prophet, but a brief prophet, one that one can read in a sitting, unlike Isaiah or Jeremiah, but we must pay attention to that, these minor narratives, reminding ourselves that the great power centers of the globe didn't pay any attention to what was going on in Palestine. Jesus, for instance, is a minor story, not even taken up by the great narratives and chroniclers of the time. We have to strain to find a story about him, yet he changed the world. And here we are, midway between Christmas and the opening of baseball season. There is a thread that binds these together. It is Black History Month. It is February. The snows are deep, but the possibilities and the hopes of spring abound for all of us. I know when we think of Black History Month and baseball, our minds will be drawn to Jackie Robinson, who in 1947 joined the Brooklyn Dodgers, and Branch Rickey, a Methodist himself, who vowed that God was a Methodist and this was God's plan, which is a challenge to us who are of the Methodist tradition. How much do we understand what Branch Rickey was talking about, the importance of equality and justice, even when it comes to baseball? But I reach back to the minor narratives, the minor prophets, and I realize that there is so much that those of us who are in the mainline, or should I say white society, never learned as part of the narrative of the whole. We marginalized it at best. We forgot it at most. And when it began to emerge, we still marginalized it, didn't we? We called it Black history, or Black baseball, or the Negro Leagues. It was not nearly as important as what was going on, since Abner Doubleday staked out what that perfect diamond should be. But I think about this today, midway between Christmas and baseball. Two names that I will remind us and how it came to be. Names that are the Bethlehem, the minor, the diminutive, but should become part of our own narrative. It is not a secondary narrative, it is part of the clear narrative of who we are as people. Think of that in your own life. What stories have been forgotten that have formed and shaped you? And what do we need to adopt that are ours? William Edward White. Remember that name? As much as Jackie Robinson, as much as Ted Williams, as much as Hank Aaron, as much as Ty Cobb. William Edward White, from Georgia. His father was a plantation owner. His mother, Hannah, was one of his slaves. That should tell you a lot. And when William Edward White became old enough to go to college, he made sure to send him to Brown, in Providence, Rhode Island, an Ivy League school, because he could pass, hear this, as white. And yet, he is now thought of as African American. On June the 21st, 1879, almost 60 years before Jackie Robinson became the first African American player in the major leagues, he snuck in for one game and played professional ball in 1879 with the Providence Grays. And then he disappears from baseball, moves to Chicago, and becomes a bookkeeper for the rest of his life. But after I followed the story of William Edward White, I came upon the story of somebody that I should know. He bears my family name, Bud Fowler. Bud Fowler. Never heard of him. And what is most amazing is that he played professional ball in Susan's and my hometown. It is not part of our story, but it should be. Bud Fowler. Remember that name. The earliest known professional player, manager, and organizer who was an African American. In the 1870s, he played for the Select Nine and beat the Boston Red Caps. And then he played for the Lynn Five Oaks and the Chelsea Club, and he worked his way across the country. For those of you who are from Iowa, he played in Keokuk. Bud Fowler. They're part of all of our story. The narrative of Bethlehem, the least amongst the nations, but part of who we are. Those who had talent and pluck and risk to play the national pastime. Bud and William. And then African Americans disappear for a while until Jackie Robinson and Hank Aaron. Midway between Christmas and spring training, let us remember the fuller narrative that makes us who we are as people of God, citizens of the world, and the gifts that God has given to all of God's children. Amen.